Hey, welcome to the Mothership Explorers. I'm Lauren. We have Katie from Down the Rabbit Hole at bedtime tonight. Thank you so much for being here, Katie. I can't wait to see what we've got here, I think.
Yes. Thank you so much for allowing me to come back on your podcast and to bring a tale of motherhood that is really rocking my world and rocking the world of many YouTubers, because Ruby Franke and the channel 8 Passengers was a big part of YouTube for quite a long time. And we're here tonight to talk all about Ruby Franke, her husband Kevin, and a very explosive interview which was recently released to the public regarding all of the abuse that was taking place involving Ruby and Kevin's children.
Right. I heard Kevin's first interview with the police, and he sounded pretty hush-hush, but this one is like a 180. What do you think happened?
Right. Well, I was really grateful to you because you're the one who sent me this second interview and I hadn't heard it. I think there are a lot of people out there who haven't been exposed to the second interview, because I agree. The first interview with Kevin is kind of like he's keeping his mouth shut. He seems rather supportive of Ruby and kind of acting like, I don't know what the big deal is. By the second interview, which we're going to listen to here now tonight, a lot of that has changed. I'm not sure exactly what happened. You kind of gave me a theory that maybe he had seen his children in between the two interviews. Do you still think that might have been the case?
I really have no idea. I've been thinking about this quite a bit, and I can't figure it out because he really went from I love my wife, my wife, my wife, and not really even inquiring about his children,
Exactly.
to suddenly divulging all this information that's really quite out there.
Right.
And still not mentioning his children, though.
Yeah, I agree. And my theory about all of it, after listening to the entirety of the second interview, is that Kevin started putting the pieces together when it comes to their financial situation. I really believe that this has a lot more to do with the fact that Kevin realized he needed to save the business, okay? He seems to be very minded towards things, having a house, being able to pay for the private schools. They talk about that at some point in time. Having the money that they need from their many business ventures and from his job as well. So after listening to both interviews, I'm just speculating that this was more about Kevin being able to hang on to all of that money.
That's really pathetic and sad.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what else I can say about that. I mean, he did not respond as I would expect a loving father to respond to any of this from what I've seen or heard.
Totally agreed. Now, as we go into this second interview, I want to let you know that throughout this interview, Kevin brings up a couple named the Hannahs. Had you heard about this couple before this second interview?
No, I hadn't. Had you?
No. And several people came to my channel asking about it. I did some research and I shared some information on my latest video about the Hannahs. Okay. So I'm just going to do a quick synopsis here. The Hannahs are another Mormon couple who were very close to Ruby. They were good friends, spending a lot of time together, and the Hannahs are the ones who brought Ruby and Kevin into Connexions. They were close with Jodi Hildebrandt before Ruby and Kevin ever even got to know her. So they're kind of like a missing piece of the puzzle. A husband and wife couple with, I think it's like 9 or 10 kids, who are also Mormon, who participated in this Connexions therapy. They were close with Jody, ended up separating from her and creating their own therapy kind of institution or cult, some might call it. I'll share a picture of them on screen. And I just received information from a source saying that behind the scenes, this couple, and this is all allegedly just from the source who claims to know them, is in the process of now getting a divorce. So the Hannahs were this couple who were seeing Jody. They were involved in Connections. They were telling Ruby and Kevin that their marriage was just stellar because of Jody's advice, and they brought them into the group. And we're going to hear Kevin talk about them extensively throughout the interview.
Is there any couple who hasn't separated after being in Jody's care?
Of course. I mean, at this point, I would be shocked to meet one. So, okay. So let's delve in a little bit to the first snippet I want to share with you from the interview. We're going to listen in, and then Laura and I have a lot to say about what's going on here.
Over 20 years of marriage, asking for sex as a husband frequently, or asking her to wear lingerie or things like that, how that made her feel. And it was really emotional, and it touched me. Like, I didn't realize that she felt so strongly about that she felt so hurt by that.
So this first snippet from the interview that I wanted to share with you, Laura, it's about Kevin divulging to the police that the reason he got involved in the Connections therapy group with Ruby is because Ruby had a lot of concerns about Kevin's sexuality. She felt that their relationship with one another was not a good relationship, and that maybe it was even sinful because Kevin was so lustful towards her. I don't know if you're aware, but it's very prevalent in the 8 Passengers Reddit group for people to talk about how Ruby constantly throughout her YouTube channel and the many videos that she makes, she kind of indicates that Kevin is way too into sex. It's just too much for her. If he does the dishes, then she'll give him sex. There's a lot of back and forth, almost seeming like she pays for things that she wants from him by offering some kind of sexual relationship between the two of them. And it's been a long-standing topic in the Reddit group. And here in the very beginning of Kevin explaining why they got involved in Connections, he's letting us know that it had everything to do with sex.
Sex gets the dishes done?
Apparently in this relationship.
I didn't know that.
I think I tried that in the beginning, and now it's just not enough of a payment for those dishes anymore.
Okay. Yeah.
I know you're speechless.
Wow.
Yes.
I am.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the thing that's really interesting about this for me is that it essentially seems to confirm a lot of the concerns that fans and haters had about the 8 Passengers YouTube channel, that there was something going on in the background, and we don't know everything about it. I'm not professing to know for sure everything that's going on here. I can only listen to what Kevin has to say and then kind of speculate a little bit around what he's saying based on other evidence that we have, right? And so here he is essentially telling the police, we got involved with these people because my wife was concerned about the amount of sex that I wanted. He says something to the effect of, I wanted her to wear lingerie and stuff like that, in quotations. Now, I have a lot of questions about what the stuff like that is. He's very vague. And when I listened to this interview, although he's presenting all kinds of information, he's spewing out information about Ruby and Jody, personal and private information, I felt like he was definitely holding back and protecting his own secrets. That was just the feeling that I got from it.
Well, I have 2 thoughts. One, I'm wondering if Jody influenced Ruby to think that Kevin had a problem, because that's her MO.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And the second thing I'm thinking is maybe that's one of the reasons why Kevin was so freaked out when his daughter went into the house to collect things.
Yes.
Maybe he was afraid that she found his special closet.
Yep. And if you're not aware, Kevin actually asked the police about arresting his eldest daughter, Sherry, for trying to come into the home after all of this happened and maybe get some clothes for the younger kids. He literally was so concerned that Sherry might have obtained something. I don't know if it's money. We have no idea what it is, that he was willing to go to law enforcement about her, which is, it definitely sounds quite suspicious. So for me, this interview was shocking, Laura. I'm so glad that you ended up sending it to me because it's a lot of information to go through. They released a lot of photographs, audio, video, body cam. It's a lot to go through, and many channels are showing all the different pieces. But to me, this interview specifically really gets to the crux of what I wanted to know about. Like, how did this happen? How did this family implode and become like this? Okay. And what I think I'm hearing is that Kevin had a certain idea of how the relationship should be. He had a certain idea of what he wanted. It sounds like a lot of it was sexual, and that Ruby was struggling with that. And it may have gotten even worse as she moved into this relationship with Jody.
Oh, that sounds reasonable.
Asking her to wear lingerie or things like that, how that made her feel. And it was really emotional, and it touched me. Like, I didn't realize that she felt so strongly about that she felt so hurt by that.
So I do find it quite interesting that Kevin is expressing some concern for Ruby here. I mean, he says, like, in this interview, he says to the police, I was not interested in this quote unquote cult. I kind of saw it as like man bashing. But once Ruby and I sat down and spoke to each other face to face, and she expressed that I made her feel, he doesn't say this, but it sounds like Ruby is saying that he made her feel quote unquote dirty, kind of like that she felt that the lust and the sin just was something that was taking away from the spirituality of their relationship. That's kind of reading between the lines, and that he really did feel a sense of wanting to connect better with her and have a better relationship. So I do have to give some credit there that he's presenting it as though at first he would not have been interested in what Jody had to say. However, once Ruby expressed her deep desire to continue on with this therapy, he agreed to do it. Now, that could be also a way of lowering his own involvement, or kind of doing his best to seem as though he was really pulled into this.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, this couple seems like they could have been really amazing together if they didn't have kids.
That is a very interesting point, Laura. And because we are doing a podcast about motherhood, this is like the kind of difficult story we want to examine and be aware that there are situations in which people may really struggle, not only with just having children, but 6 children, right, Laura?
6.
Like,
Yeah,
they had older kids who they had already parented and raised.
Right.
And it's interesting that it's only the very youngest who were placed in the most strictly abusive situation with Jody. It's almost like they had grown out of their parenting phase. They were done. They had parented Sherry and Chad, the older kids, and it was finished.
Right. And also with the younger kids, she was doing YouTube. So she was using them as props. And, this strict parenting got her attention.
Right.
So I kind of felt like she just wanted to keep taking it to the next level, just to keep that interest going, the momentum going.
Right. And we're going to hear more about that as we get further into the interview.
And so I committed that I would really give it a go. And I stayed in the men's group, And so, you know, in that men's group, I met with Jody every week, with the other men that were in the group,
So here we hear from Kevin about what this counseling was really like. Connections was actually like a series of groups that these people would attend. And then they would also meet with Jody one-on-one and as a couple, and they were paying for all of it. So it was a huge moneymaker. Some people are saying that it was a cult-like group, but I found it really interesting that Kevin speaks here, and we'll hear a little bit more about it. Kevin calls these groups kind of like addiction counseling, which was interesting. So it was kind of brought to Kevin and served on a platter to these men as like, this is an addiction counseling type of class. If you're wondering what kind of addiction, Kevin goes on to say that these are men with sexual addiction, which just really kind of perked my ears up, Laura, because it's sort of like, once again, I think they're saying, without fully saying, Ruby thought I had a sex addiction. Ruby thought I had a porn addiction. This is something that we had been dealing with. This is like the speculation that I have based upon what I saw on the YouTube channel, what's available on Reddit, and now what he's coming out and saying. He was willing to attend this group that was based on addictions, and he says it was about sexual addiction.
I think he was in the very beginnings of doing whatever Ruby wanted to keep his relationship alive with her when he started this group.
I think that at this point in time, Ruby was the main breadwinner. And I believe that was likely her control over Kevin. I have personally not gotten the feeling that Kevin is so in love with Ruby. And that's based upon the old videos that we saw on the 8 Passengers YouTube channel. He seemed like someone who was just kind of going along with this for seemingly the money, the fame.
Maybe somebody more in love with money.
Right. I think he also showed a lot of ego. Once again, my personal opinion, I would love to hear what our subscribers have to say. Many of you maybe have watched this couple more extensively than either one of us, but I did see some of the old 8 Passenger stuff, and I remember thinking, this guy is really full of himself. He's not available a lot. He's out of the house a lot. He's not super involved with the kids, but he does show up and do some of the filming. So my thought process would be that Kevin was interested in Ruby for all this fame and money. And that he also, you know, wanted to have a regular sexual relationship with his wife, maybe more than what most of us would be willing to do. I have to say, I'm really at a standstill in my love life. So I would have, you know, there are times that women go through periods of times when they're struggling, maybe in other areas of their life. And so it's hard for them in the bedroom as well. And Ruby had 6 kids.
Tired.
Yeah, she's exhausted, I'm sure. So I can see someone saying from this interview, Kevin sounds like he really cared about Ruby. But I'm kind of looking at it through the lens of what I've seen before. And I'm really questioning how much of this is him protecting himself and presenting a certain narrative to the police and to us. Because he's got to get the kids because he's got to get the money. And so it really needs to look like this is a Ruby thing and that his involvement was somewhat minimal and he was kind of pulled into it. He always thought it was weird. He kind of went along with it, but it was for the good of the family. That's the sense that I get from what he's had to say so far.
because like our marriage felt like it was getting better and stronger. So this was now, summer and fall of 2020, and in addition to that, there was the whole YouTube cancel thing. I don't know how much you guys are.
Okay, so this is the first time I really wanted to bring this to you, Laura. This is the first time that we hear from Kevin and Ruby that the canceling of the YouTube channel was a big deal for them and that it was canceled, because what they've been saying in the past, Laura, is that they chose to end their YouTube channel because they wanted to protect their children. And here we have Kevin in this interview admitting, like, we really lost our channel. We lost everything. So what do you think about that kind of just juxtaposition of what they've been telling the public all along, but he's bringing out some truth in this interview.
Right. He mentioned that it was Chad, the whole beanbag incident, that made people go wild, saying, "What's wrong with you? You don't do that." And I would imagine there's some truth in that, but maybe it's also been used as an excuse. I think Jody had a lot to do with it in the long run. I think this is all Jody.
Yeah. And let me play a little bit more. We're going to hear Chad talk about how they went from plenty of money to nothing.
In May of 2020, some videos that Ruby released on that dealt with Chad just blew up in her face, and it was all over the news, and hundreds of thousands of TikTokers and all this stuff were just piling on and basically burned down like our YouTube channel. And overnight, like the income went, we lost 90% of the income overnight.
Right. So with that loss of all of the income, I'm sure many of us can relate, or we can think about what would happen in our marriage, but the state of the marriage and the family had to have been in some kind of state of implosion, like looking around and being like, where are we going next? And here's where I really have come through this interview to recognize that a lot of Ruby's worth was tied into this social media empire. Kevin says she's depressed. They're really struggling. They could really made it like they were leaving YouTube. They don't want anything to do with YouTube anymore because it's affecting their kids, and they're doing this for the right reasons for their kids. But this interview brings everything to light that they were forced to walk away from this massively successful channel that was providing them with a huge income.
A huge lifestyle for sure.
Mm-hmm.
New house, new cars.
Lots of things were being donated to them for them to show on their channel, I'm sure. So it would have changed their family dynamic and the way that they had to live. It would have changed drastically after all of this.
And I could see where Ruby would have been depressed too. I mean, this was her big accomplishment in life.
And I can really relate to that. I mean, it's on a different level. But for me, I use my YouTube channel as an escape from having to stay home during COVID, from being a stay-at-home mom for periods of time while we're traveling. And, if it was just suddenly all taken away after I had built it up, even just the little bit that I've built, it to be, it would certainly make me feel sad. Now we're talking about, this was a massive empire with millions of subscribers, and they were pretty much a brand, and all of Ruby's sisters and other family members were also doing the same kind of work on YouTube and making money from it. So she probably really felt a sense of loss.
Right. They were doing it, but not like she was.
Right.
And that was hard.
Was this like
So at that time, Ruby was really distraught, and she was looking for support. She was looking for someone who would understand her, who would validate her, and she found that in Jody.
All right, Kevin says it. He just comes out and says it for us. She was looking for someone to validate her. Where were you, Kevin, and what was your role in all of this? Once again, Kevin is kind of removed. What I'm hearing is he's a lot removed from Ruby's life. A lot removed from this relationship, a lot removed as a father, and everything has exploded for Ruby, but he's already on his own trajectory over here on the side, moving forward with his job. So he might feel bad for her, but she's got to find validation somewhere else. And who did she go to? Jodi Hildebrandt.
Right. And Jody just wasn't some neighbor. Jody was highly regarded in the Mormon church. I think that was part of Ruby trying to get her own ego stroked, is by having somebody with power in the church.
Right. I wanted to ask you, what role do you see religion, religious commitment playing in all of this for Ruby? It obviously plays a big role, but I'd like to hear some of your take on it.
As far as her 8 passengers, or as far as like what aspect?
As far as the way she was choosing to live her life, because a big part of the 8 passengers channel, a big part of everything that's happened with Ruby is that she is firmly dedicated to disciplining and raising her children up in a certain way.
Oh, I think the church had everything to do with it. Absolutely. I think that's what guided her.
Right. I mean, we're talking about religious fervor, in my opinion. Yeah. I think that it was a part of her life from early on. And I'm speculating. You guys know I'm a pediatric nurse. I've done psychiatry, but I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not qualified to diagnose her, but I see a lot of mental health issues going on with Ruby from before she started her channel, probably from the time she was a small child. And we'll hear more of that ongoing. And we also see that with Jodi Hildebrandt, this supposed savior who is going to be providing validation for this family and for her clients. We're going to hear that she has a lot of mental health issues going on as well.
All the stuff she did with Chad was because of Jody, and so it makes sense that she would go to Jody, for emotional support when she felt like her world was burning down.
Once again, we hear Kevin letting the police officers know everything that happened from the beginning. When we first lost the channel, it was because of Jody. And from everything I've read, that's likely true. Ruby was using Jody as a therapist for Chad, as a therapist for herself and her children before they even got involved in Connections. And it was supposedly and allegedly Jody who helped Ruby find a wilderness camp to send Chad to at some point in time. So really, at this point in time, when her entire YouTube channel collapses, Jody's standing there with this, supposedly wealthy family. I'm sure they still had some amount of wealth, I would assume, unless they had spent it all. Jody is standing there, and she's the only one left for Ruby. She's Ruby's
And you might wonder, why didn't Chad go to Ruby's house? Well, Jody's house. Chad's too big. She can't control him. He's too big for her. But she also had her niece years prior where she did the same stuff. So she could have easily said, well, I have experience with this and that with my niece, and we can just do this at my house and I'll take care of him. But she wouldn't have been able to, because he would have, clopped her.
You're so right. Exactly. That's so true. And now we're seeing that that's exactly what happened with these very young children as well. And my question here is where is Kevin? Jody is becoming Ruby's rock. Kevin, once we said it before, say it again, he's in his own world. He is in his own world. And I have seen this in my own life in certain ways. Of course, it's nothing like Ruby and Kevin, but we definitely, although we started our marriage thinking that we were so equal and everything would be, perfectly divided 50-50, as time has gone on, we have leaned more towards me staying home with the kids when I can, and my husband being the primary financial provider. And it does create this kind of inequity in the relationship, or it can if you let it. So I think we're seeing a very extreme version of this. To me, it sounds like Kevin's there when he wants sex. That's what I'm hearing, even in Kevin's own interview. That's
also things kind of like the power shifted when Ruby became the one with all the money.
Right. Exactly. But Kevin was still going out and accomplishing, because Kevin is actually, you'll hear him say, I was just watching this crazy video of Kevin. He is addressing the school board because Ruby was not happy with what happened at school with her kids, that they were going to dance to a TikTok song. And she makes Kevin go to the school board and addresses them, and she videotapes it and puts it on YouTube. Okay. And Kevin starts his speech with something like, hi, I am Dr. Kevin. He emphasizes that he's a doctor. He's dressed in a certain way. He carries himself in a certain way. And he also says, I am a professor at BYU. He starts his entire speech off with just making everybody aware who he is and what his accomplishments are.
Right. Was he wearing a leash?
I'd love to see it. He was probably wearing a leash behind closed doors. But
Choke chain.
Allegedly.
Yeah.
Speculating on that. But yeah, he goes into this big meeting and it's all about how he presents himself. And I still see that with him. I think he's really knocked down in this interview, but I still believe it's part of his consciousness to protect himself, protect his own image here. You know, he's giving us some snippets, but we're not hearing like, well, I really messed up doing all this and that. This is my part of it. We don't really hear as much of that going on. And you're right that we don't hear much about the kids at all.
Nope.
You know? All right. Okay, we're going to listen to a little bit more.
In the meantime, I felt like our marriage was getting stronger. It felt better. Like we didn't fight as much, and even though we were having less sex, it felt more connecting, and it was just. I thought, wow, this is great. Like, you know, this is great, and I was happy to be the guy up on the stage.
All right, so Ruby loses it all. She loses her channel. She's not making money anymore. She's not spending all day filming. She's not coming up with ideas. She's not talking to people on the phone about her brand. And Kevin says, you know what? Things started to get better between us. We weren't having as much sex. We weren't having as much sex because we were doing the Connections thing, but things started to, we were just having a better relationship. And I just wonder what Ruby was thinking about it. I think Ruby had been taken down a notch. She's not the breadwinner anymore. She's not the person up on screen doing commercials and doing whatever. And I don't think she was feeling good about herself. I think she was relying heavily on Jody. She was trying to move her husband into this therapy group. And he's just like, things are getting much better.
Yeah.
I don't think he's connected to what's going on for Ruby or his kids. That's the feeling I'm getting.
Right. Well, Ruby had a plan. I mean, not Ruby, sorry. Jody. Jody had a plan.
Jody had a plan for Ruby, right? Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Now we're going to hear just really quickly, Kevin talk about how as he started in Connections, of course, he starts going to all these conferences and immediately Jody and Ruby start putting him up on stage.
It felt more connecting, and it was just, I thought, wow, this is great. Like, you know, this is great. And I was happy to be the guy up on the stage. You know, that's.
For me, again, what I hear from Kevin is that he's willing to do the Connections thing because guess what? He's getting a lot of attention there. There's some ego, there's some power, there's money that's supposed to eventually come in because both Kevin and Ruby are going to train to be therapists in this group. And they're being put on the stage of Jody's conferences to say, like, this is our standard. This is the couple that we're trying to help everyone get to. Look how honest they're being. Look how Kevin's willing to own up to his sexual addiction. Look how Ruby, and I've heard Jody say this, look how Ruby was willing to leave behind a multi-million-dollar YouTube empire for her children.
Mm-hmm.
Now we hear, this interview says that's a lie, Laura. That's not really what happened. She lost that empire. And she moved into this realm because she was struggling.
So I get up and just say, like, yeah, I was the guy who said, I think this is a bunch of, like, you know, man-hating, you know, women, but it really has made a difference in my marriage. And it really did. Like, I believed it.
What do you think about that? So he's up on stage.
Yeah. Yeah. I think he's standing on a cliff at that point. That stage is a cliff.
But I think he feels like a poster boy. He's sucking people into this situation for Jody and her Connections group. And I just question, why would Kevin do this, right? He's a professor. He's got a whole other spiel going on, right?
He's a professor who doesn't know what the word emaciated means. So I'm not so impressed with his intellect.
Right. But he is. I think he's well impressed with himself.
He is.
Yeah. I was, especially when I saw that video of him, I'll see if I can find it, where he gets up in front of the school board, you know, and he's impressed with himself. So I was surprised that he's willing. I'm very surprised that he's willing to do this Connections thing. But what I see is that Jody and probably a lot of other people around realize that one way they can get these men pulled into this and involved is to start it all off saying, look at him, this amazing specimen. Let's give him a lot of praise for being willing to come forward. He's our poster boy. And he's not the only one that they did this to, but you can assume it was done in a very extreme manner for him because he was already famous, you know? Right. So Jody recognized this was a good family to put on stage.
Oh, well, yeah, they're a very nice looking couple. You know, they're very, very, what's the word they use? Camera
ready.
I don't remember.
Yeah. Camera
they
ready.
Look good. They look good.
Right. They sure
People would want to be like them.
Right. And I think that if you meet them, they're well spoken. Now, I can already see that it would come off to me that Kevin was just a little bit too full of himself. But I think Ruby, if you're not listening to her talk about raising children, sounds, you know, like a well-spoken person. And she presents a certain way of being that would suck in for sure some of those Utah Mormon moms who are looking for a place to get help for their children.
Well, she exudes a lot of confidence.
For sure. And we're learning that behind the scenes, maybe that wasn't really the case, that having her entire YouTube channel crumble devastated her. She wasn't just like, oh, well, too bad. According to Kevin, it was a hard time for them.
And so those conferences and stuff, everything continued like that until March of 2021, when after a conference, a Connections conference down in St. George, all the inner circle, all the people who were being trained as, you know, mental fitness coaches and stuff. So that was Ruby and a bunch of other people and their spouses. We went out to like a dinner afterwards, and that's where Jody really opened up to the women in a private conversation that she believed she was being tormented and haunted by shadow figures every night. And
wow. Just wow. Okay, so many questions. Here I see religious zealotry. Why is she only pulling the females from this big group of people who are all following her and paying money and being coached by her and getting therapy from her? She only pulls the females aside and tells them that she believes shadows are following her. Anything to say about that? Just dragging those females into all this, but leaving the men.
He has a real issue with men to begin with. And I don't think she trusts men. I think she's afraid of men. I think sharing information like shadow people would, you know, make her feel maybe a little vulnerable. And she's certainly not going to have an audience of men who are going to look at her like she's batshit crazy.
Right. And look at
women are more open to this stuff too.
Oh, 100%. But also, here's where we really see the manipulation that is Jody. Her entire being and the way that she ran all of this was very manipulative. She's not out there just being like, hey guys, this is who I am. The shadow people are following me and I need your help. She knew that there were certain people she could trust with that information, that she had indoctrinated those people enough. It very much reminds me of a lot of what I know about the Church of Scientology. There's a slow roll in the Church of Scientology where you enter and they only tell you a little bit about what's going on in that church. And it takes a long time to reach the upper echelons and really be trusted enough with all of the information about what that church actually believes. Okay, a lot of us know this. And I think that's a little bit in a less organized way. That's a little bit what Jody's doing here. She is indoctrinating these people early on with shit that sounds a lot more reasonable. You know, it's making sense to them. And then she takes them all out to dinner. And then she separates the women, but only the women who've gotten really close to her. And then she brings up the shadow monsters that are chasing her, Laura. So it's like she knows that people are not going to believe some of this right out of the gate. And my biggest
can you
question.
imagine having someone tell you that? Someone who you had a lot of faith in, who you really respected and went to for advice.
Oh yeah. Now a friend, just someone I met on the street, I'd be like, you're my kind of person. Yeah, I got shadow people following me everywhere. But not someone who's giving me therapy. That's not what I'm looking for in a therapist, you know?
You're funny.
Okay, my second question in all of this is, what the hell is wrong with Kevin? Why would he act like this is nothing? He's just like, yeah, it was spooky.
Yeah.
Spooky.
She's spooky. Yeah.
It was spooky.
No.
Where is again, the lack of connection to his family? Where is Kevin's motivation to protect the people he loves?
Right.
What I'm hearing and seeing is there's none of that. Not even an ounce of it, Laura. He basically like, it was weird. Dum-de-dum, going back to work, leave my kids with Jody and Ruby all day. They're talking about shadow people.
I would expect that kind of talk from a 3-year-old, really.
Right. He's entrusting his children to them, and he's entrusting his wife into this situation. And part of the group that was around them and, getting into all this and talking about the shadow people is the Hannahs, the couple that we talked about earlier, the Hannahs. So these are longtime friends of Ruby, and they were a big part of her life. And she probably also felt that she could trust them. But we hear later, in the interview, or it might have been a little bit earlier before this, that Ruby also had a jealousy of them. She didn't Do you see kind of what I see, that Ruby always has to be the best at everything?
Yes. She wants to be number one. I think she came from a family with more than 2 kids for sure. And I think she had to compete for that attention, and she was constantly trying to be in the spotlight. Right.
For sure. And she was desperate for attention. That's what I'm seeing too.
Mm-hmm.
Right, let's listen a little bit more.
And that was spooky, and
so during all of this, we just listened to Kevin talk about how spooky it was. My big question was, where are the children? Not once. We are, I think, at 38 minutes into the interview, I've cut some of it out, and he's not once brought up the children. Where were they staying? Who were they with? Was joining Connections even really about the children in the beginning? It sounds like it was all about Kevin's sexual addiction, but really it was all about Jody wanting to just bring this couple in and become friends with them, be friends with Ruby. Yeah. We're not hearing anything happening for the kids. They're off on some retreat. So this is not a family, despite what they showed us on YouTube, who was dedicating their lives to their kids. Which could be, I'm not saying I probably do a little bit too much investment in my kids. And when they leave me, I'll be sad and lonely with 100 cats. So, there has to be an in-between, but, I see the opposite end of the spectrum with Kevin and Ruby.
I've had Mormon friends. I've known Mormon families, but this whole thing is kind of making me wonder, do Mormons view their children in a certain light,
right?
As parents, do they feel their job as parents is to raise their child a certain way to ensure their acceptance into planetary heaven, or I don't really understand what they believe, but rather than like someone like me or like you see children as this little love bug and aren't trying to do anything specifically other than give them a happy life.
Right. And I think the short answer to that would be yes. And it's something we can talk about a lot further in future videos, because we do plan to talk about this more. But for sure, there's a certain doctrine that many people in the Mormon church are following. Some are not, just like in any kind of church. There's different levels of commitment to what they're doing. And I would also say, like, I just want to put out there, I see some good in that. Like, there are some things about what Ruby initially is trying to do, some of the basic tenets of, like, I want to teach them responsibility, I want to teach them respect. These are some things that I actually struggle a little bit with in my relationship with my kids, because I'm just like, freedom, love, light, you're an indigo child, and I just want to like eat up all your energy, and I miss out. So there's always there's an in-between. Ruby's on one extreme. Someone like me and other people may be on more of another extreme, and it would always be good maybe to come a little bit more towards the middle.
Right.
But I think with Ruby, we're really seeing that very extreme behavior, and it would be more present in a family that is following some kind of religious zealotry. And that is not all Mormons, not in any way, shape, or form. I love some of the people I've worked with who are Mormon abroad, and they've welcomed me into their church. Really good people, but every church has the people who are taking it too far. Every church has people with mental illness, and that's what we're seeing with Ruby, for sure.
Right.
We're going to listen to a little bit more.
I don't know exactly what happened, but the Hannahs do. All I know is at some point within a couple days of that, in that month of March, the Hannahs drove down from Mapleton and picked Jody up and brought her back to their home in Mapleton, and she lived for 6 weeks in that home in Mapleton. And this is where, like, I don't know what happened, but I do know that there's two different sides of stories. They tried to introduce her to a new cult lady that the Hannahs were getting into. So they wanted to merge their cults into one, apparently.
Okay. Skirt! This is where, like, if I was driving a car, I would have slammed on the brakes and been like, what are we talking about here? Let me just throw it out there. So what Kevin has to say here is that this couple, the Hannahs, they were very involved with Jody. They were very involved with Ruby. They're all in Connections together. But the Hannahs have found a new lady who they also really like, who's also running some kind of therapy, cult-like retreat type center. And they think it would be a great idea if this mystery lady combine their cults together and create a new mega cult with therapy oozing out of the closets. It's all going to be about therapy. And of course, they don't call it a cult, but Kevin does here. So
that's interesting that he's suddenly calling things cults.
Right. And he says in here, they ask him, were you calling it back then? And he says no. And then we didn't think of it as a cult, but now I see it. Once again, protecting himself. Got to get the kids, got to get the money. But the Hannahs bring Jody to their house. This is how Kevin's describing it. Jody and Ruby to their house. And Jody feels like, or she tells everyone that she was held captive there for 6 weeks. The Hannahs say, we were just like, so weird. Why would you go to anyone's house for 6 weeks? That's weird to me. Where are the kids? Where are the kids?
Where are the children?
I don't know if the older kids are watching them, but apparently Ruby and Jody were there. And the Hannahs are there, and they're introducing them to this cult lady. And let me just listen to the rest of it, and then I got to hear what you have to say. This is what Kevin tells us.
According to Jody, she was held against her will for 6 weeks and was kidnapped, and she escaped and got out. According to the Hannahs, after 6 weeks of Jody stabbing herself with forks and knives, cutting herself, and wanting to commit suicide and trying to seduce the husband of the family, they kicked her out.
Did you hear that? The therapist, the owner of the Connections group, the multimillionaire with a huge house that has like a vault in it, all these things going on. She's running therapy groups here. She's being recognized by the Mormon Church for being the utmost Mormon therapist. She is cutting herself, threatening to commit SI. She is trying to start a relationship with one of the men in this family.
Don't forget the shadow people.
Oh my God. The shadow people are making her do it. We don't know. She's also been kidnapped for 6 weeks. She was unable to leave, according to her. The therapist. Kevin tells us that the therapist that's been working with him, his wife, and all these people and owns all this property and has this big company spent 6 weeks cutting herself and stabbing herself with forks.
And she doesn't bathe.
And Kevin
I might have jumped ahead. Sorry.
No, that's okay. No, that's totally fine. It doesn't matter. The point is it's all crazy shit, right?
Yeah,
it's all crazy shit.
Yeah.
Okay, but we hear
You'd
how
think
Kevin.
At that point, you'd cut her off.
That's what I'm saying. Even the Kevin's way of explaining it is like, well, that was spooky. It's insane. Kevin is acting like he has no role in this. He's just an outside observer telling them what happened. All right. Oh, I also wanted to make this statement. When I hear like stabbing herself with a fork, she's having SI. This is really a person who has, Jody, the therapist, is a person who has psychiatric needs unmet. Mm-hmm. And I don't know why. I want to know why. Is she embarrassed?
How?
Yeah. Is she embarrassed? Is she so religiously fervent that she believes she can't take medication, or I don't know. We don't know everything that's going on, but these are severe mental health needs. Why is no one around her, or her herself, because she's a therapist, saying we need to get you some psychiatric help?
Yeah, well, because she's the leader, and she's the one that's God's mouthpiece.
This is bad. These behaviors are the kind of behaviors that will get you admitted. Insurance will actually pay for you to stay on a psych ward, and it's hard.
But doesn't it sound kind of like Charles Manson?
Yeah, it sounds really extreme. Now, this is what Kevin's telling us, and he's talking about it in a very blasé attitude, which kind of I don't know what to think. It makes me wonder if he believed it. I have no idea. But this guy's just acting like he's a casual observer of all of this. Mm-hmm. His wife and his children are intertwined with this woman. And he's just like, this sounds so spooky. A little bit spooky over here. All right, let's listen to the rest.
I don't know what's the truth. Maybe a little bit of both. I don't know. But the point is, somewhere around mid-April, Jody was back in her home in Ivans, and she was a hot mess. And she reached out to Ruby for help. And Ruby was always jealous of the Hannahs, that they had a better relationship with Jody than she did. Ruby, and this is goes back to her childhood. She wanted to be the best friend. She wanted to be the most liked. She wanted to be the one that everybody knew. And so it hurt her that she felt like she was being excluded from what was going on at the Hannah's house. And then she'd say, why?
Let me stop here. There's one little snippet left. But this just blows my mind. This is everything about 8 Passengers, everything about YouTube, everything about motherhood and families and putting kids on YouTube and putting them on social media. My goodness, Ruby is the prime example of someone who sought attention, any attention from anywhere. She was unfulfilled. She had holes and baskets and pots that she was trying to fill up in her life, Laura. And she was using the YouTube channel for that. She's not treating her kids so good. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on with Ruby we can talk about in another podcast. I've talked to you about how I think she was pretty sadistic. Mm-hmm. But she's also got all these pots and these holes in her heart that she's trying to fill up. She's getting some of it filled with YouTube. Kevin's out there doing whatever the heck he wants, only coming back for the SEX. And now the YouTube channel gets stripped away from her. And the only person she has left is Jody. Jody is a psychological mess. She needs help. But everybody around her is acting like she's the shit. And Ruby wants to be the shit again. So she starts ignoring and normalizing. They're all normalizing all this. You can even hear it in Kevin's voice that it's like, well, it was a little weird. It was a little spooky. No, Kevin, this is sick. This is sickness that needs treatment. It's not saying that, the person can't get better. They need help. And, so there's a lot of that going on. And I just want you to listen to this last little piece because Kevin says, that the Hannahs are excluding Ruby a little bit. Ruby was really jealous of them. They're close to Jody. She wants to be close to Jody. And Ruby would say, why? Listen to what Kevin has to say.
There's so many secrets, and the Hannahs would say, it's not secret, it's sacred.
It's not secrets.
And when the time's right, you can know too.
I want to end with that. Not secrets, Ruby, it's sacred. What we're doing is sacred. And this brings it home to what you had shared with me long ago where I wasn't really getting it. And you were kind of like, I think there's a lot of religious zealotry going on here that's contributing to what Ruby is doing. You know, I didn't see all that when I saw the 8 Passengers YouTube channel.
Yeah, well, I think she was really good at making it seem like it was just a method of parenting rather than saying I'm doing this because of my religious beliefs.
Exactly. Yeah. And she really fed it to us, much like a lot of other TV shows. And, you know, we've talked about the Duggars and things like that. And I mean, there is some level from my point of view of being like, just because I choose to live a certain way doesn't mean that other people who are living differently aren't right. So I'm very hesitant to like judge them in that way. But once again, I think we're seeing 2 ends of the spectrum where she could be coming more towards the middle. I could be coming more towards the middle, but living all the way out on the outskirts where you're disciplining your children so harshly. You're willing to accept this woman who's stabbing herself with forks being your psychiatrist. Something is really not right.
Yeah. I mean, can you imagine if you and I were interviewing Kevin, if we were the ones in the police station, we would be rolling on the floor. It would really be awful.
We would be calling out, like ordering some wine to go to go with this interview, just to make it through. I know. The interview has really rocked my world. There's so much more. This was a short snippet, but I wanted to like go really in depth into it because this was the moment in which, Laura, I was like, what the, you know, I just lost it. I was like,
and it gets so much weirder.
Yes. And that's where we want you to come back and join us again next time, because we are deep diving even further into this interview. And we want to really tie it all into family life, motherhood. What was going on here? How does it relate to our own lives? I look at this and I learn things from it. I really do. I look at these really extreme cases and there's stuff for me to learn from it in my own life. So that's why I think it's important to talk about it and really dissect what's going on.
This was definitely the tip of the iceberg. This was nothing compared to what's coming up.
I can't wait. I cannot wait to meet with you again so we can go over more of this spooky
from Spicy Kevin.
Yes, from Spicy Kevin. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining us.
I have one question for you. One question. You have to choose who your parents are. You're floating above the earth and you're going to go into your little baby body. Do you choose Michelle Duggar and Jim Bob or Ruby and Kevin Franke?
Oh my God. I have to sleep on it. I'll tell you in the next episode. I've got to do some research, but I'm going to head off. It sounds like my children are ready for me. So I hope all of you have a good night and you join us next time as we take off on the Mothership podcast.